First of all, David Kessler, I'm so happy to see you again.
It's just so wonderful to be here. It's so wonderful to see you.
I know we go way back. In fact, we have a funny story. Can I tell it?
I dread, but go ahead.
One time you were on the Today Show with me,
Yep,
and you sat down in the chair
yep.
opposite of me, and you were in New York, and I said, Dr. Kessler, you may want to button your shirt. You had buttoned your top button, and you had, I think, buttoned your bottom button, but you had forgotten to button the rest of
Well,
them. Do you recall that the same way?
there's a reason why I'm wearing a shirt today that doesn't have any buttons.
It was so. Were
Well,
you
yeah.
embarrassed? I mean, I
You know,
wasn't
you-
embarrassed because I
you-
felt like
you're
we knew
actually
each
going
other.
like this because I think we're live.
Oh no, I think we were about to go on the
Well,
air,
I- to
and I
me-
think they were counting us down.
And you're just pointing, fix your shirt, right? The button popped. I mean, maybe I was a little bigger then.
You were, and in fact, I want to talk to you because I haven't seen you for a while. You are so thin, and I'm worried now you're too thin.
You know, it's an interesting reaction. Weight is such a fraught subject.
And it's
so,
yes, I was wondering, should I even bring that up?
But I mean, it's so hard to talk about, and it's what's key to me is it's really not about how big you are, or small you are. You know, it's really about health. And I think the science, since you and I talked about this, you and I went through, I remember the supermarket.
Yes.
We did the food label together, that nutrition facts, right? I mean, it wasn't on foods when we did our interviews, and then we put it on.
That's right.
We worked very hard, and we showed people how to use that nutrition facts, and it's sort of become part of our everyday life. But, that science has evolved a great deal. And, to me, it's always been about health. It's really about, reclaiming health.
And that, in fact, is what your new book is all about: diet, drugs, and dopamine. I can't wait to talk to you about this because I'm so fascinated by this topic. But I also want to take advantage of the fact that you're here to ask you about what's happening in our country right now, if I could, Dr. Kessler. As somebody who has been involved in public health for decades, you were chief science officer of the White House COVID-19 response team. You co-led Operation Warp Speed under President Biden. You were the head of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration under both George Herbert Walker Bush and Bill Clinton. What do you think about what's happened at the FDA?
I had the privilege of going back into government service. Did FDA for about 6.5 years, but then got called back in at the beginning of COVID. And as you said, co-led Operation Warp Speed. And I came in sort of second act because the prior administration, the Trump administration, got it started. It was perhaps the greatest success of the president. 676 million vaccines, right? Free on every corner, right? Pretty safe, really got us through this. We were able to do that. I don't think it'll ever be done again. 676 million vaccines to everybody. We got through that because we had certain institutions in place. National Institutes of Health, FDA, CDC, BARDA, which is the applied research and development in emergencies. Right? Those institutions were there. Yes, we had to work on top of that. We had to overwhelm the problem. We did. We worked day and night. What I don't understand is, we couldn't have done what we did but for those institutions. So the President Trump's greatest success, he's destroying or gutting the institutions that made that happen. That's my concern.
But he's run away from that success, And so many people in this country are now, pardon my French, kind of shitting all over our COVID response and vaccines and the public policy that got us through the pandemic. Why do you think that is?
I wish it made sense. Remember that night that Trump was taken to Walter Reed,
Oh, yes.
right? He had difficulty breathing. It was during COVID. He had, he was in trouble. I mean, he could have died. Went to Walter Reed. He received 2 monoclonal antibodies. Turned him around, right? All of a sudden, he referred to them as miracle drugs. I think they saved his life, or certainly played an important role in his health. The person who approved those drugs for both President Trump and millions of others, Dr. Peter Stein at FDA, Peter Stein was fired a few weeks ago. Does that make any sense to you? The person who, saved or could have saved President Trump's life, they fired. Do you think they really know what they're doing? Anyone walk into the Oval Office and say, "Mr. President, the person who may have saved your life, we just fired"? I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me.
What do you think the ramifications are of dismantling or neutering the Food and Drug Administration?
I always believed, that there was a pendulum. That you go, you serve, you step out, the other guys come in, they take over, and that you fix things. I have real concerns whether the level of the gutting, the destruction, the taking out the infrastructure, it will take us decades to replace the kind of talent. There are some 600 to 700 recusals today at FDA, I heard over the weekend. What that means is that there are people, if you're looking for a job, you have to recuse yourself under the ethics rules. There's an exodus. That talent, at the agency, there are thousands of person years of experience. I know how to grow talent. I was a dean at 2 medical schools. I know, what it is about the next generation of scientists and doctors who are going to do the kind of medicine. That's priceless, and yet it's being let go. Bad things are going to happen on their watch, right? We see it already. Not far from us. Newark Airport. Bad things happen. And the great thing about being in public service in the federal government is there was enormous expertise. You could always find somebody, right, at 2 a.m., when there's a crisis, when I had a real emergency. Mm-hmm. I could reach out and get somebody who had true expertise. That's going to happen on their watch, and they're not going to have the expertise. And that does not bode well.
Having said that, looking back, do you think there was fat to be cut? Do you think there were things that could have been more efficient?
In the scheme of things? You're talking about rounding errors when you're talking about these scientists and the amount of money in the total budget. I didn't see a lot of fat when I was at FDA. Just think about it. The agency regulates 25 cents on every consumer dollar. You know how many imports come in every day? 80% of our drugs, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, are coming from India and China. And that's a lot of inspections. And when FDA is not doing that, that means, they can't assure the safety of what's coming in. And that really, really concerns me. Fat. I really don't think that was the number one priority here.
So we're talking about major cuts to the NIH, and that means major cuts to grants that are given to research universities all over the country. We're talking about major cuts at the FDA. We're talking about major cuts at the USDA that affects food programs that farmers can give to rural and under-resourced kids. We're talking about young scientists getting fed up and going into a different line of work. I mean, what is your biggest concern when you think about this massive overhaul / dismantling of these agencies and this kind of work?
And the attack on science and the attack on universities. I was dean, so I understand the pipeline.
Of both Yale Medical School and UCSF,
Correct.
University of California, San Francisco.
To the great, medical research institutions in the world. My concern is about the pipeline, right? I mean, it's not just what we do today, but it's what we do today for tomorrow, and that investment. So people spend their careers finding the kind of cures, helping assure the safety. I think that if you're a young person, and if you're a PhD or an MD, you have to understand, these young people, they went through COVID, right? So their labs were closed, their careers, everything was a little harder during COVID. So they took a hit there. Now, if you're at Harvard or you're at Columbia, they're talking about not funding these institutions. This is not about some elite institutions. This is about the drugs that you or I or our family take, that we depend on. We're on the verge, of an ability to make improvements in health like we've never seen before. This country was the leader in that. Maybe we didn't know how to do the machine, the knobs on the machines. Maybe we weren't great at manufacturing everything, but boy, we were great at the ideas. We were great at the medicine. And if you look, Nature Index, the top 10 universities, right? In the world, in the natural sciences, by that Nature Index, 8 of the 10 are now in China. Only 2 are there in the United States. 10 out of 10 of the universities and rankings in chemistry, that's the drugs, the synthesis, they're all in China. Are we really cutting back on research? Or do we really want the Chinese to eat our lunch on this?
Speaking of that, you mentioned that so many ingredients for pharmaceuticals come from China and India. With these tariffs, how is that going to affect not just drug development, but drug availability?
The inspections. Today, FDA doesn't have the ability to inspect.
To make sure these ingredients are pure.
You have to go to the plants, the manufacturing plants in China. The anti-obesity drugs that offer such promise, right? They're not there are no miracle drugs
we'll talk
here.
About
but
that.
No,
yeah,
right? But if you look, there are copycat compounded versions coming into this country today, and FDA doesn't have the ability to even do the inspections because of these cuts. To assure that these copycat versions are safe.
That's one aspect, but also with the tariffs, maybe they're not going to be able to come in at all, or the pharmaceutical companies are going to have to pay much more money, and ergo the consumer is going to have to pay so much more money, right?
Look, if you look at the level of frustration in this country, I need not tell you, right? There's real frustration that we're dealing with a broken healthcare system. There's no doubt, the prices are too high, right? The insurance companies have all these obstacles, making it hard to get
to
access.
afford.
But FDA was always there to assure, the quality, to make sure that when you actually took something, what was on the label was actually in the bottle. And now we're gutting it.
You talk about concerns about the healthcare system, and I think that's one of the reasons RFK Jr. has gotten some traction among people who care about being healthy. And I'm curious how you feel about his positions and his appointment as Secretary of HHS, which is a really big job.
I know that department. I had the privilege of working in that department, 2 rounds. No doubt he's tapped into a populist chord. I mean, he's on to something. And I mean, there is a great concern about chronic disease, right? I mean, that is very, very important. It's cardiac disease, it's diabetes, I mean, it's stroke, it's neurodegenerative diseases. And, there's such an ability to take those on. I'm just concerned that what he's, the way he's doing it is he's going about it. It's not going to have an impact. I think it's the wrong way. I mean, we now have the ability. We now know, from the science, that at the core of much of that chronic disease is this visceral fat, this toxic fat, the fat in our midsection. Right? That is driving, the inflammation, right, that occurs because of that toxic fat. We all knew that weight wasn't very good for us. Right. I mean, I've been big. I have suits in every size, and you've seen me in every size. Right. But we now know. To really reclaim our health if we wanted to. And I'm just concerned about the areas that they're focused on.
Like what?
Well, first of all, the anti-vaccine stuff. Is not helpful. The food dyes, however laudable that is, it's not at the center, of these chronic diseases. We have an enormous opportunity here. We finally have the tools, to be able, to make inroads, and people can reclaim their health. If they use those tools and they have good care, but we have to make those tools available. We have to help people. We have to explain and try to make clear and simple. How do you do this? It's been so complicated and been so obscured in the past.
What are you most worried about when it comes to RFK's leadership and some of the things that he might do in this arena?
Look, I think in the end, they're wasted opportunities, right? Because I think he's struck a chord. It is about the ultra-formulated foods. He's
and the root causes of chronic illness.
The effect on the American body, is very clear, right? That effect of ultra-formulated food, that drives, food addiction for so many people, and we have to rethink how we use that term. Mm-hmm. But ultra-formulated foods really are driving this visceral fat, this toxic fat.
So you kind of sound like you think he has a point, but
isn't it always the but? Governing is hard, right? You can do things by press release. You can go out there. And that is good, but really giving people the tools, helping people, improve their health if they want to. To understand. My concern is that in the end there'll be more misinformation than light.
Do you think Casey Means is qualified to be Surgeon General of the United States?
I was a dean of, medical school. She was well trained. Went to Stanford. Did I think 4 or 5 years of her surgical residency. We'll see. She certainly has the training. And others have surprised us in the past. Remember Dr. Coop?
Oh, yes.
Right? A lot of controversy. My concern about the administration is not any one individual, but I think it's going to be very hard for anyone, to do necessarily what they think is the right thing if the administration is not fully supporting. I think we'll have to see how she does.
There has been a great deal of pushback, as you know, about her training and background, and she has also said things critical of vaccines, birth control pills. I think there is understandable skepticism in healthcare, but there seems to be this desire to just blow it up and not take the positive things.
Look, it's never, it's always the 150 people who you don't see who are around the president. I mean, when I was FDA commissioner, I worked under both a Republican president and a Democratic president, and then came back. It's all these other people who are, trying to do what they think the president wants. Governing is not simple. I think we are in for a very hard time. I'm not sure in the end. We're only 6 months in.
If that.
and I'm not sure how this turns out well. I have real concerns. I always thought you could fix, other team is in there, other administration is in there, and you come back in, you can fix it. I think some of the things they're doing this time, it's just different.
Let's talk about your book, Diet, Drugs, and Dopamine, The New Science of Achieving a Healthy Weight. Tell us what this book is about in a nutshell and what inspired you to write it.
I wanted to make the mystery of weight, why it's so hard, why no one in the end can keep weight off. I wanted, in a clear, evidence-based way, to give people the information, to give a path to reclaiming health for people, who wanted that information. There is no one way. These are journeys, but even basic things, I didn't know. Right? I thought I'd lose the weight. I was good. I went on with my life, and I didn't realize that's really when it begins. These are lifelong conditions, and you need care, and you need to be under good care. These are chronic diseases, right? But it's so key. It's so key in health. I think it's essential. I think it's as big as tobacco.
And that's where you have also done a great deal of work. But, this problem has existed for some time. And in 2014, I did a documentary called Fed Up.
Right.
Because I couldn't understand, with all the conversations about diet, with all the focus on low-fat food and blah, 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 we were getting more and more obese. So how did we get here? Why has obesity climbed so dramatically and is predicted to get even worse in the future?
That perfect trifecta: fat, sugar, and salt. Fat on sugar on fat, fat and sugar, fat and salt, fat, sugar, and salt. It stimulates the reward circuits of our brain. We're not eating for fuel. We were wired. Our brains were wired to focus from an evolutionary point of view when survival depended on it, when food was scarce. Our brains automatically focus on the most salient stimuli in our environment, that energy-dense foods. You fill that environment. You make it into a food circus. It's capturing those reward circuits of the brain. And there's food addiction is real, or there's a pre-addiction. I mean, you don't see it until you go without it. It's only when you stop. And the reason, I kept on, losing weight, right? But I'd always regain it. I was just relapsing because those circuits were always there, and I didn't know how to tame down those circuits.
When you talk about those three ingredients, salt, sugar, and fat, you describe these as ultra-formulated foods. What does that mean, and why not ultra-processed?
It's not just the processing. You could make these, in your kitchen, right? It's not necessarily the preservatives or the emulsifiers that are driving it. And I just wanted to distinguish it. Yes, certainly, highly processed is part of it, but it's it's highly processed, highly palatable, high glycemic index. We are, just pouring in, these ingredients, into our bodies. This rapidly absorbable glucose that's just overwhelming our metabolism, that's increasing the amount of fat in our liver, that's increasing this visceral adiposity, that's going, it's, getting into layers of the heart, and the pancreas, putting out these molecules, this sick fat, this inflammatory state. We're in this soup of these pro-inflammatory molecules, and we're just bathing our organs. And no one sat and thought, what is the consequence of all this processed, ultra-formulated foods?
So you compare food to cigarettes, right? But it's not for everyone. My brother-in-law was visiting this weekend. He is thin as a rail and eats constantly. So not everyone has this predilection toward addiction, do they?
So if you look, I think the default, you look at the percentage who are overweight and obese in this country. The ones I want to study.
You should study him.
Exactly, because he's not the default, right? So the question is, what is it about him? I think we're all wired to focus on salient stimuli, but what is it that captures him? Why? And it's not for everybody. I agree. There's a certain 15-20% of the population for whom food doesn't do it.
It does it for him, and he's eating pretty much constantly, but he never gains weight.
Yeah.
He looks thin when he tucks his sweatshirt into his pants.
Right. So, what is he eating? Right?
A lot.
What kind of foods is he eating?
Everything.
Everything? Yeah.
Yes.
So
we marvel at him, and we're very jealous of him.
So I actually went to measure my metabolic rate. Right? I went to first. I did it by breathing into the tube, the indirect calorimetry. I went up to Columbia. They were very nice. I went into the room calorimetry, and I think we've underestimated the differences in metabolic rate, right? Because only when I went to test my metabolic rate that I found, my resting metabolic rate was about 1,200 calories a day. You add to that physical activity. If I eat more than 1,700 calories a day, I'm going to gain weight. So, what is his metabolic rate? There are, one of the big things is there's enormous variability. On these new medicines, not everybody loses weight. There's a great deal of variability. And that's why it's so important. If you struggle, right? These things, there's no one place where everybody enters this journey in the same place.
And there's so many factors involved. And I wanted to ask you about how the availability of ultra-formulated foods and the change in the way we eat as Americans has actually changed us physiologically.
I just was watching how I ate, right? And I was talking to a number of doctors who've grappled with this, I mean, in their own lives. And, I think if you look, food is very powerful. I used food to calm me down. I used food at 10 o'clock at night if I had to work for another 3-4 hours and I needed to increase my cognitive focus. I mean, I would eat. I mean, watch somebody graze through the day, right? I mean, we're all different, I mean, in our patterns. But watch somebody who picked up a cigarette. I mean, 30 years earlier, I mean, if I were born, my guess is I would have smoked, I mean, to regulate my affect. And I think a lot of people use food in the same way. We certainly know that both, cigarettes and this ultra-formulated foods are highly reinforcing. In fact, if you do what's called these self-administration tests that FDA uses, whether, a rat will press a lever, both these ultra-formulated foods, I mean, and nicotine, are reinforcing.
Tell us about the role glucose plays in all of this, because I know that you talk about it frequently in your book. What is glucose exactly?
So, I mean, glucose is the, essential sugar, I mean, that our brains and our bodies use. And, our blood's glucose level stays at, within a range, and it's regulated. But most these highly ultra-formulated foods, when they get absorbed, I mean, they're carbohydrates. I mean, they're fat and carbohydrates, and they are, rapidly absorbed. And my concern is that they overwhelm our body's ability to handle them. And in fact, if you look, right, I mean, insulin is the way what our body puts out to regulate that glucose. And we've become, as a nation, I'm going to use a term that, hyperinsulinemic, right? It's a complicated term, but that has increased in the last, 2-3 decades. We've doubled that. And I think that hyperinsulinemia, I think there's an epidemic of it. I don't think we've recognized it. We don't have a good way to measure, that insulin. But I think that inflammatory state that I was talking about.
Yeah, dumb that down for me. You're saying that our insulin has been jacked up so much because of our glucose levels and because of what we're eating?
Because of what, I mean, if you're pouring glucose in and you're rapidly absorbing it, right? Your blood glucose is gonna, spike.
And your insulin is going to be set off.
Correct. And if you constantly do that, you become hyperinsulinemic.
And that causes inflammation.
That causes inflammation. I think it's causing toxic effect. Now, which comes first, chicken or egg? In this visceral fat, this fat around your midsection, you get caught in this vicious cycle because some think it's the toxic fat that caused the hyperinsulinemia, this insulin resistance. But it's certainly, the burden on our bodies because of it, right? And no one asks, what's the consequences? What's the biological effect of pouring all this ultra-formulated food, which is just like pouring glucose into our bodies? And it didn't dawn on anyone, right? To go ask, what's the long-term effect? And I think we're seeing that long-term effect in terms of the cardiovascular, kidney, neurological diseases, some forms of cancer.
And that is because our diet has so increased in these ultra-formulated high glucose foods.
This highly processed, high glycemic index, energy-dense foods. I think it's both excess calories that we're taking in, and also this rapidly absorbable glucose. I think the reality is that's the food environment. You and I have been talking about this for a number, of years. I think we're getting better But I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. So the question is, how do you protect yourself? What could you do in the face of an environment, right, that is constantly triggering those reward circuits in our brain? How
And
do
when you talk about those reward circuits, Dr. Kessler, you're talking about dopamine, right? So, right?
So I'm talking about the reward circuits. I'm not sure it's just dopamine. There's a number of neurochemical substances. Dopamine, if you take amphetamines or cocaine, that will, boost your dopamine way high. I don't think nicotine, I don't think ultra-formulated foods, raise it to that level. And certainly that wanting, that craving, that cue-induced wanting, that reward circuit, right? That food noise, right? That pull of food. I mean, that's the reward circuits, and I think dopamine plays a role, but I don't think we worked it out fully.
Do we not understand the other circuitry yet?
I think we're only beginning to understand the circuitry, but there's no doubt that pull. That pull of food is very real, and you can call it addiction, you can call it pre-addiction, you can call it food reward. The important thing, it's not about willpower, it's about biology. And the reason why so many people struggle is not because they're weak, right? It's not because they don't have discipline. It's because we've placed them in a cruel food environment that their brains, just
Get hijacked.
Exactly.
Let's talk about GLP-1s, because enter these new wonder drugs. You went on a GLP-1 yourself for 8 months, correct?
Correct.
So
7-8 months, yes.
Tell me why you went on it, what the impact was, and what you think of this new class of drugs.
So they are an important tool. They are not a magic pill.
Well, in some ways they are, right?
Well, but there's no magic to them. So let's talk about how they work, okay? And I don't think the pharmaceutical companies have fully leveled with people, but I've spent a lot of time trying to understand how these drugs work.
And you were patient zero for your own research.
And I will tell you the story about that. But just these drugs slow down, the motility, the movement of your GI tract. Your GI tract, food moves through. So what these drugs do, and they affect both the brain and the gut, they slow down gastric emptying. So they keep food in your stomach longer.
Is that why some people become constipated on them?
People become constipated, but what do they also do? If I keep food in your stomach longer,
you're not hungry.
Well, but why are you not hungry? If you have food in your stomach, what are the types, when does that occur? I mean, if you get the flu, right, your gut sometimes just slows down, food stays in there, you get food poisoning, food stays in there. I mean, and how do you feel when food's just sitting there and not moving through and you're bloated? I mean, these drugs take you, there is this cascade of fullness, satiety, this sort of edge of nausea. There's nausea, and there's even more distress. When these drugs were given initially, decades ago to animals, these animals didn't even move. There was a visceral malaise associated with these animals. The breakthrough with these drugs where they learned to titrate people to the edge of nausea, right? So what is the thing that can overcome these reward circuits? What can shut down these reward circuits? This level of nausea. Because if I'm feeling ill, if I'm feeling this edge of nausea, right, and what am I going to do? If food's going to stay in my stomach longer, right, what am I going to learn to do? I'm going to learn to eat differently because I don't want to put food in my stomach. I may not even feel bad, but I know if I'm going to eat, I condition myself. So I think a lot of people, the great thing about these drugs is they give you the opportunity to change how you eat. You can relearn how you eat, right, when you're on these drugs. Because if you put more, food in your stomach, you're going to feel little. So what are you going to do? You're going to change, how much you eat so you don't feel full. You're not going to want to put fat in your stomach. So you learn to eat differently. But here's the problem. These drugs only work when you take them. Sure, I mean, they're like blood pressure medicines or lipid lowering medicines. But, we don't have an end game with these drugs. I mean, the pharmaceutical companies, the premise is that you'll stay on these drugs for your life. But they're very expensive now. Yes, the price will come down. But people don't want to be injecting themselves. They don't want expensive drugs. They don't want these adverse reactions. So the reality is they will work for a period of time as long as you take them, we think, right? But if you go off them, you have no end game. So, I mean, if in 3 and 5 years, if as we see now, majority of people are only taking these drugs for 8, 9 months and then going off it. So if people take these drugs, spend thousands of dollars, and we haven't figured out how to use these drugs wisely, they're going to lose the weight. And we know they gain back much of the weight when they're off it. If they don't have the tools, also the nutrition, behavioral, physical activity. That's why it's so important that we learn to use these drugs well, that the FDA require the data. Can you get off these drugs safely? What do I do when I go off these drugs? What kind of care do I have? This is a chronic condition.
So what is your biggest concern about the side effects other than weight gain after you start using them? Do you think we know enough about what these drugs do to you in the long term?
We certainly have, 10, 15 years of evidence that companies will point to, right, that these drugs have been out there for diabetes, but they have not been out there at these higher doses. And my concern is that we don't know how these drugs, about the safety and efficacy in the real world and how people are using it. And I think we have to have better data so people can learn. I went on these drugs. I went off these drugs. When I started gaining a little more weight, I went back on these drugs. But that's intermittent use, and I'm not even sure anyone studied that intermittent use and knows it's safe and effective. We have to get the answers to these questions.
So you stopped, and then you'd gain weight, and then you'd go on them for a few.
Look, the key is it's not about the drugs. It's learning to retrain your brain how to eat, right? Maybe I got to learn, like your brother.
No, I think he just is blessed with a high metabolism. I don't
So
think it's anything about learning. But what you're saying is you have to have some kind of behavior modification accompanying these drugs so that you don't stay on them for life.
Well, some people will want to stay on them for life, but if you're diabetic, some people will do that, and they need to be under that care. I don't think that's what the data show right now. The data show that the majority of people are not on it for life, and we have to provide people with good care. These drugs are very powerful. Look, they shut down appetite, right? But understand they're also potentially dangerous. Because, when you look, and the companies haven't put out a lot of data on this, how much are people eating, right, when they're on these drugs? How many calories are they taking in? I think that when I ask doctors, many people are eating below 1,000 calories when they're on these drugs. They're eating 600, 800 calories. 20, 30 years ago, the great George Blackburn, at Harvard, who studied this, were putting people in the hospital when they were eating 800 calories a day and monitoring them. Now, I think we've learned a lot more. You don't have to be in the hospital, but you have to be monitored if you're going to eat. So I'm concerned about malnutrition, potentially occurring.
What about bone density and muscle?
I think those are absolutely key issues. Because when you lose weight, you don't lose just fat. You also lose muscle. So if you want to come over to the house in the basement, I'm sitting there, I'm doing resistance training. I mean, I'm lifting weights. I mean, I got I got a barbell coach. I mean, who is great, because you can't lose weight without also doing resistance training. It's absolutely essential.
What are the other worrisome side effects or long-term consequences?
It's probably the malnutrition, which is short term. Constipation, which we just think that's ordinary, but sometimes that constipation turns into intestinal obstruction. There's a slowing of the GI tract. It's called gastroparesis. It's all the metabolic consequences of dehydration, this euglycemic, these medical terms, acidosis that can occur if you're malnourished, if you're not taking things. Look, these are chronic conditions, and please, these need to be administered under care. I mean, some of these sites, I'm all in favor of access. I mean, I think these drugs are way too expensive, and people need access. But I see some of in talking to some of these, medical directors, who are running some of these telemedicine, some of these are very good, but sometimes these docs are spending a minute looking at the record. I mean, that's not the kind of care. I mean, I think if we're not providing good nutrition therapy, good behavioral therapy, as well as medical care, then we're not providing the kind of medical care that is absolutely essential.
And if I'm hearing you right, there hasn't been enough long-term research on some of the consequences of these drugs.
Especially to how these drugs are being used in the real world. FDA and the companies, it's absolutely essential. They put these drugs out without an end game, I think, of how the vast majority of people are going to be using them.
We have heard a lot of positive unintended consequences of GLP-1s. I've heard things about reducing dementia. Obviously, heart health kind of goes with reducing your weight. It might help in addiction. You talk about that food noise, Dr. Kessler, that it might help people with that. Even neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's, it may have a positive impact. So what about those things, and where are we on that?
So, again, we always thought weight wasn't good for us, right? We didn't understand it was causal, that it was in the causal chain of diseases such as atherosclerotic heart disease, stroke, heart failure, kidney disease, this inflammatory state. Doctors have treated these conditions, high blood pressure, elevated lipids. We've treated these conditions piecemeal. And at the root, for many people, is this visceral fat. Again, it's not how big you are or how small you are. It's this visceral adiposity. Look,
you can also be TOFI, though, right? Then on the outside, fat on the inside?
Absolutely. I mean, certain populations, are insulin resistant. You can be insulin resistant and still appear to be thin. So you're exactly right that it's that visceral fat, that toxic fat. That's the real breakthrough that we need to deal with it. Look, for decades, there would be thousands and thousands of diet books, right? And they were all short term, and sure, people could lose weight. They lost the weight, but everybody gained it back, right? And no one. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to try to do the comprehensive work. Not to give people any one answer, but to give them the range of tools. That's why I wrote the book, so people could read it and make a decision, what journey they wanted to be on. But you are absolutely right. I mean, you want to do something for your health, reducing that visceral fat. For decades we couldn't do that. you gain it back. And out of that, the whole body positivity movement created, in part because if I lost the weight, I was going to gain it back. So why even, do it? Because it was going to be to no avail.
And can't you be healthy and overweight?
Look, the question is, you can love your body, but you can also do things for your health. And that's what I care about. This is so hard to talk about.
So what do you think of the body positivity movement? Do you think it's appropriate, or do you think in some ways it's dangerous?
I think they did in an environment when there weren't tools to keep the weight off. I mean, to be able to get rid of the shame, the stigma, that's great. I think they did it was enormous. I mean, it was long overdue, and I applaud them. I mean, I've talked to some of the leaders, Evelyn Tribble. I mean, I think it was enormous contribution. But please help me. You can also do things for your health.
So net, are these GLP-1s positive, a positive development for the overall health of Americans? Or yes, as we said earlier, yes, but. Is that how you come down?
I think there is an enormous ability. They're an important tool to reclaim our health, but they absolutely need to be done under good care. If you can have a dietitian, a nutritionist, also have physical activity. They're not a panacea. There's no magic pills. It's hard work, but you can have an enormous effect on your health.
Let me ask some questions that my audience wanted me to ask you. Is it really possible for some people to lose weight if they simply eat less and move more? That's the whole calorie in, calorie out argument that has been dispelled, right?
In the end, the only way you're going to lose weight is if you have an energy deficit. Okay? So the problem with that, eat less, move more, is in fact, that's what you got to be able to do, but no one could do it because of the addictive circuits. Because if I eat less, those addictive circuits are going to be there, and I'm going to gain it back, and then I'm going to eat more. So no one could pull that off, right?
So it's impractical.
Well, you didn't have the tools. I mean, look, you could move me to a different, environment. You can move me to a different planet, and I won't be in the same, food circus environment. And then my brain won't trigger it. But that's not an option, right? I mean, I can't get out of this environment. Yes, you can shape it, right? But I mean, the way these drugs work, all they do is get you to eat less because they decrease your appetite. They reset your appetite set point because they slow down, the amount of motility in the gut, and food builds up in the gut.
So how you're digesting food.
I mean, and how that makes me feel, and how that tempers the reward circuits. But it's also, I mean, when you slow down the gut, one of the way these drugs work, I think, is there's less dumping of this rapidly absorbable ultraformulated foods into the lower part, the duodenum. So it's not as rapidly absorbed. So you don't get these spikes. So you have less spikes when you're on these drugs. So look, there's multiple mechanisms, but in the end, whether it's diet, it's drugs, I mean, whether it's surgery, I mean, it's about getting you to eat less.
Someone asked, what are your thoughts on intermittent fasting? Is it safe and effective for losing weight and keeping weight off?
I mean, it's certainly, if you want to talk about eat less, right? I mean, intermittent fasting is a way to eat less. For certain people, I mean, it's a way to do it. I mean, and it works. Is there any magic about that method other than reducing the time that you consume? Are there certain metabolic advantages of that? The data doesn't seem to support that. But again, it's an important tool. It's another tool that I mean, any way that can get you
to eat less.
I mean, in confronted with that visceral adiposity. I mean, and again, this is about changing body composition. It's changing the amount of visceral fat that you carry. So if it works, I mean, it's another important tool.
Are doctors prescribing GLP-1s to children who are diabetic or pre-diabetic? Childhood obesity is such an issue.
I have friends that work in the area, and I will tell you that I just am enormously in awe of what they do. I mean, I think it's the hardest question. I mean, do you put an adolescent on these, I mean, who is struggling with their weight? On the one hand, why deny them therapy? You know, I mean, that can work. I mean, just because, you know, your metabolism, you have the hormones and you have that satiety, don't look at someone else who doesn't have that and say, hey, they shouldn't, why shouldn't they be able to have them? But the thought of putting a young person on this, when you know you're only going to be able to keep the weight off if you stay on this, are you really willing to commit to be on these drugs? I mean, for a lifetime. So until we know how to use them wisely and whether you can go off them safely and how to do that, look, you know, I think that's why my colleagues who take care of these children, I mean, I think are just doing God's work, and I applaud them, because it has to be done very carefully on an individual basis.
But if it's with medical oversight and behavioral modification, is it, I know you don't want to make recommendations, but is it a viable option for some of these kids who are really unhealthily overweight?
It's a viable option. I mean, some of the drugs are approved, I mean, for adolescent use. Certain are not. But you have to understand there's no end game, right? So you have to go into this with your eyes wide open. When you start something, right, what are you going to do in 2-3 years from now? So you have to be able to understand that you have to put new learning in place and have other tools that you can rely on if you want to go off these drugs.
Have you seen a rise in eating disorders in specific age groups since the introduction of Ozempic and other GLP-1s?
I think there's no doubt that this is one of the most complicated subjects, and I am sure that that is going on. Look, these drugs get you to eat less. Not, you know, I mean, some have said, I mean, I've asked this question to some of my medical colleagues, isn't this, in some cases, just assisted anorexia, right? Some of these drugs. I mean, let's call it, I mean, you're eating less, right? And you have to be very careful. And that's why I think there has to be screening before going on these drugs to make sure that there is no pre-existing eating disorders. But look, I think it's one of the most complicated areas. I think these drugs are an important add to the armamentarium. I want to see how they work and what the data are in binge eating, right? But again, these have to be very carefully managed, because they can, I believe, trip somebody over, I mean, into an eating disorder if not carefully managed. And if you start to see that, you need to be able to pull back. But in the end, I think these addictive circuits in binge eating, in bulimia, right? I think these addictive circuits, I mean, are at play in all these conditions and part of the underlying physiology.
What role do subsidies to big producers and food deserts play in our current obesity epidemic? I can answer the food deserts part, which is unhealthy food that's available in food deserts. Ultra-processed or ultra-formulated food is the most available food. It's signaling people's brains in those areas, and they don't have things like produce and healthy food. So obviously they are going to fall victim to food addiction and unhealthy eating. Is that accurate?
That's very well said. It's overwhelming our metabolism. I mean, we learned, you know, that industry learned to, you know, produce energy, you know, that rapidly absorbable glucose, that highly processed, that energy dense foods. It's overwhelming our metabolism.
And the other question is about subsidies to big producers. I think they might be referring to high high glucose corn syrup. Is that what you call it?
Look, there are different agricultural policies, whether they're subsidies or tax credits. I mean, other policies that indirectly, favor that situation that we got ourselves into 75, 100 years ago, right, that we thought just pouring in, this highly absorbable carbohydrates.
High fructose corn syrup. Sorry, I misspoke.
Well, maybe it's corn syrups, it's corn solids. I mean, everything. It's this refined energy that we're taking in. There's no structure. I mean, there's no food left. I mean, the reason why food is so important is because it has structure. It has
and
that
fiber,
cellulose and fiber
and density, right?
Because that slows down that absorption. I mean, I don't want to take you through and draw the pharmacokinetic curves, right? But it's that rapid rise, I mean, from your gut into your bloodstream. Those spikes, that glucose, those hits repeatedly, I mean, on our blood vessels. I mean, and the fat that accumulates in the liver, those metabolic switches. No one thought 50 years ago, 75 years ago, hey, what's the consequences of that?
And it's also the short-term satiety, right? Is that the word?
I mean,
because it goes into your system so fast, and then you have these spikes, but then you feel hungry again.
And how do these drugs work? Because they're slowing down that absorption. They're slowing down the GI tract. You're not absorbing it as quickly, and you feel a little nauseous.
Someone wrote, please ask about mood changes while on GLP-1s. I've experienced less happiness and less equilibrium.
These drugs, affect the gut. They affect the hindbrain. There are certainly upstream effects on the reward system as we talked. There's going to be a great deal of variability how they affect different people. These drugs are, by affecting the reward system, if they put you in a state of avolition, I mean, of not wanting, they cut down those addictive circuits. How will they affect you? I mean, in part, those circuits are, in essence, they make us human, right? That wanting, that desire. I mean, those ups and downs. I think we miss the effects during our daily lives. During any day, there are these ups and downs that we feel. We all process them differently, and now you have drugs that are affecting those circuits. So of course, I mean, certainly if you've had an underlying depression, or an underlying mood disorder, I think you have to be careful. I think the good news is if we can reclaim health, I think many people will feel better. But I can't guarantee you, that it's going to change mood for everybody. And certainly if you have an underlying condition, I think we have to be very respectful and careful and understand these are medicines that are very powerful.
In closing, Dr. Kessler, do you believe that science will ever figure out, without negative side effects, how to keep people at a healthy weight that is not detrimental to them, perhaps using a drug their entire life? Or do you think it will always be a combination of behavior and science?
I think it's going to be the latter. I think there are a range of tools you can use. I think there are powerful new tools that we can avail ourselves of. There should be not any stigma, right? It's okay if you want to go on these drugs. It's okay if you don't want to go on these drugs. If you're going to lose visceral fat, if you're going to reclaim your health, I think that's just something that we have to applaud, but we have to do it wisely. It's not going to be a one and done. There are no miracles here. There will not be, these are very complicated eating, weight. These are complicated biological systems. It's not about willpower. But please, please, there's an opportunity to learn more about this, and take control of your health.
I have a friend who's lost 40 pounds, and she said, I don't care. I'm going to stay on these drugs. Now, granted, she can afford them, right? Or maybe her insurance is covering it. I'm not sure. But what about the people who say, I feel so much better. I feel like I want to take advantage of some of the positive side effects for other parts of my body. I'm just going to stay on this drug for the rest of my life. Or if I go off it, I'm just going to go on it again if I see the scales creeping up. What would you say to those people? What would you say to my friend?
Is she under good care?
I believe so.
Then I'm all in favor of it.
So as long as you're under good care, you have no problem with people using this as a means of regulating their weight for the rest of their lives.
As one tool, right? Along with nutrition therapy, along with behavior, with physical activity, being wide open to the potential side effects, to understand them fully, to have shared decision making with your doctor, to understand that there are no miracles in this process, that this is hard work, right? I think that's what, good healthcare is all about.